All right. Thank you, Jason. You fulfilled the brief nice and short. I think when people start talking about over 30 years of experience first thing in the morning, it makes you feel as old as your body feels. So here we go. Good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning. I'd firstly like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you and we're all gathering today on the lands of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to their cultural authority and ongoing connection to country. Now, it is called, have I got a, where's my slide? It's up? Okay. It's really nice to see people in the room that I know as well, and someone I met last night who we ended up talking, and she said she was going to smile at me today to make me feel very welcome. So thank you. And there's other people in the room. This is terrible. The sun is beautiful, but it's quite hard, isn't it? So it is great to see so many people. And I think as I walked in, someone said they'd received a pack of stuff. If you're in a B to 12 or R to 12 school, you might this week have received some of my postcards for primary school children. So hopefully, most of you know something about my role. But it is my pleasure to be amongst such a great lineup of speakers. I did hear about Nikki's talk yesterday and that it was interesting and challenging for you, and that she did reference my work, which is a great honour to have a shout out like that. And it's really pleasing to be amongst the other great lineup of speakers and to be in a room with people who work with children and young people all the time. Yes, although the majority of you do work with children and young people, I'd have to say this was predominantly engaging with them in their role as students and in your role as educators and education leaders. However, I have quite a different relationship with children and young people, as I'm their representative to the Parliament, and I engage them as citizens. Now, that might not mean a lot, but I think as I go through my talk this morning, I think you'll see that it does kind of change the way that I interact them. So I spend a lot of time with children and young people, and I do know something about them. I'd say I know what makes them tick and talk, and what they say they want from us as adults, what really bugs them, what inspires them, and what they aspire to, and importantly, the role of education and school in their lives. So it's these things that will be the focus of my address this morning. I'll start with an overview of my role and children's rights, followed by an exploration of what I think child-focused education is and what children and young people have told me about what child-focused education means to them. And I'll finish off with some ideas about how schools can become slightly more child-focused in their approach. Before I start, I want to say a couple of things. Most of all, if not all of what I say today, are my reflections and observations of the work I've done in the last 5 years as Commissioner. However, as said, this sits within a context of working with vulnerable communities for over 30 years. So my commentary is not theoretical or academic, and it's unashamedly about presenting a child's perspective rather than an adult perspective. Secondly, what I say about what children and young people have said about their life is sourced from my direct conversations and workshops, surveys, postcards, letters and emails from now tens of thousands of children and young people across South Australia. A hallmark of my commission has been to spend as much time with children and young people as I do with leaders, and to provide advice predominantly on those issues that have been directly informed by children and young people. So lastly, if you listen and understand where I'm coming from, then I hope you'll hear things that you may not have heard before, and hopefully gain some ideas about how each of us and adults can do school differently in the future to ensure that children and young people's interests are truly considered in the design of an education that lifts everyone up. So I'll just start today with a shared understanding that all of us make decisions and take actions that affect children and young people's lives every day. As parents, carers, community leaders, professionals, service providers, elected and appointed public officials, representatives, principals, educators, support staff, we say and we do things that have an impact on children and affects how they experience the world, as well as how they understand their place within it. Of course, we don't always get it right for kids. As adults, we can make poor decisions or fail to look at things through the eyes of the child. We can be complicit in systems that don't do the right thing, and we can fail to stand up when we see injustice, and we can be discriminatory and disrespectful and fail to do the best by children. Therefore, not every environment is safe or child-focused or works to bring out the best in children. And it's for that reason that I was appointed as South Australia's inaugural Commissioner for Children and Young People in 2017, as a statutory officer with the powers and functions needed to advocate for change at a systems level to improve the well-being of South Australia's children and young people. Oh, I keep forgetting I need to click slides. Someone's doing it. No, it's okay, I can do it. So my responsibilities as Commissioner are set out in the Children and Young People's Oversight and Advocacy Bodies Act of 2016. My work is guided by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the core international treaty which sets out the civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights that all children are entitled to. It is the world's most ratified human rights treaty in history, and Australia was one of the first countries to become a signatory to the agreement, signing in 1990. The CRC was established to recognise children as citizens with rights. But it also recognises that children, because of their physical and mental immaturity, are inherently vulnerable, and that because of this, they need special safeguards, care and legal protections different to those needed for adults. Under the Convention, governments commit to developing and implementing laws, policies and practice that take into account these developmental, physical and neurological differences. But although the CRC is the world's most ratified convention, many articles are not fully enshrined in domestic law, and many authorities are not aware of their obligations as a signatory. So part of my role as Commissioner is to ensure South Australia fulfils its obligations under the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, but also to let the public know about these obligations. So, what does all this mean? In determining my priorities, I've crafted an approach that brings together the UNCRC, federal and state legal obligations, and brought them together in a rights-based approach that looks at how our services and systems respect, protect, and fulfil children's rights, largely from the perspectives of children, and I work with them to develop solutions they think will work. So what do I actually do on a day-to-day basis? So essentially I work at promoting and protecting children's rights, interests and well-being through either changing the rules, that is influencing adults to change the laws and policies that apply to children, including putting children's rights into the new South Australian Education Act, which wasn't there before, about changing minds, behaviours and practices, which is about raising awareness and influencing public opinion, that the reports I've produced on exclusion of the experience of kids living in poor households and the impact of their schooling, or about changing lives through the direct representation of groups of children experiencing systemic discrimination. Things like the work I've just done on children of incarcerated parents, which is about working with kids who otherwise are going under the radar. So from my perspective, lifting up and not holding back must involve looking at schooling and education from a rights perspective. We know that education is one of the most critical systems kids connect with. Schools are where most children spend most of their waking time. It's where they draw their friendships and interactions. And for some children, school is inspiring and provides aspiration. For some, it is a place of sanctuary, but for others, a place of torment. For some, it is a safety net, and for others, it's limiting, restrictive, and exclusionary. For some, it creates social and economic mobility. For others, it reinforces disadvantage and low expectation. But for all children, it underpins their feelings and experiences of health, safety, and well-being, and it is their life. It is, however, a system that I argue has not yet placed the interests of children and young people front and centre in its design. And it falls short of systemically or systematically involving them in the planning, delivery, monitoring and evaluation of their schooling. Taking a rights perspective means we can't act in ways that restrict or infringe rights. A rights perspective means we must intervene if a child's rights are not being protected. So if a school discriminates by refusing enrolment of a child, or a child is being harassed and bullied, this falls under a rights perspective. And a rights perspective requires children's rights to be recognised, to education to be recognised in law and policies. It requires children's rights at school to be monitored and reported. And it means we must have avenues for redress when rights are breached. A rights perspective also recognises that if children have caring responsibilities or have been removed from their families by the state, or if they don't have access to resources required to engage with school, or can't afford or need modifications or need health interventions to support them at school, or if they don't feel safe and protected by teachers, or when they don't have opportunities to participate in their community, or when they're not heard or valued or have hope. These are failings of the system, not failings of the individual. And consequently, it is the system that must respond and do the heavy lifting to improve the lives of all of our children. So from my perspective, to lift up and to ensure no child is held back requires a child-focused rights approach that works at all levels: the whole system level, the education system level, the school level, the classroom level, and the teacher level. At its core is a shift from relationships with children as students or learners to children as citizens and rights holders. Now, clearly this is a significant change, not just for schools, but for the whole community. To be more rights-focused in education means placing the interests of children and young people front and centre in culture and practice, and requires adults involved in education to stop underestimating the competencies of children and young people, stop relying on adult representations and assumptions, and systematically seek children's perspectives and experiences directly and gather feedback from them as standard practice. We should afford children the same opportunities as adults have and stop assuming that we are the experts in the contemporary world of children. So rights-based education requires us to put children and young people's interests and issues first, look at schooling from a child's perspective, find out the voices, views and experiences of children and young people in relation to their schooling, develop, support and embed opportunities for children and young people to participate in all aspects of school and community life, and to shift to a position that values and respects children and young people and moves away from a view of children as either risky or at risk to children as citizens. A child-focused, rights-based approach to education sees children as citizens who want to participate, belong, be heard, have their ideas considered, experiences validated, and to validate and show them they belong. Children as contributors with fresh ideas, perspective, enthusiasm, skills and value that should be brought to the table. And children as consumers who want relationships with schools, businesses, institutions and government that are based on equality, fairness, inclusion, respect and trust. I'll let you ponder. So, we need to think about this in our work with children and young people. It is important to remember that we, the adults in this room, are experts in our fields. We do hold enormous content knowledge and practice knowledge, which is invaluable. But what we don't have is knowledge of what it's like to be a 21st century child. So I suggest that before we launch into any strategies or solutions or decisions about things that will impact on them, from the simple to the complex. We need to know about them. We need to know what makes them tick and what their world is like. In designing for children and young people, we must bring our content knowledge and their context and experiential knowledge together. And we must apply this discipline equally, whether the task is designing the Year 12 jumper or designing classroom layouts and play equipment or evaluating teacher performance and behaviour support strategies. It is important that we do this across the continuum of things that we do that impact on children. So I'm just going to hop into what is the world of children in 2020. And I know you know kids, but it's often when you think about them at population level that we start to understand them as a generation. Their world is volatile, complex, uncertain, and ambiguous, a world that is radically changing. And this is the backdrop against which our children and young people are trying to develop their identity and sense of self and belonging. Whilst the pandemic impact will be ongoing, there have also been, as we know, enormous technological, demographic, political and global changes in the 21st century that have greatly impacted on those centennials born since 2000 and Generation Alpha born since 2010. You know, I know, they are the most digitally literate, socially networked, globally connected, sensory engaged humans to have ever lived. They are the first generation to live with ubiquitous Wi-Fi and therefore their seamless transition between on and offline worlds. Technology, as you know, underpins everything: school, learning, play, intimacy, relationships, dating, and serviced access. They experience an online world where they are creators and consumers, not simply passive consumers. And I think when people ask about why TikTok, etc., has grown so amazingly, it's because it's them making their own, creating own content. But it's the groups like Lego and Nike who get kids to design their new products. This is the world of children. It's also a world, as you know, where they've been shaped by constant connection and fear of missing out, constant affirmation and comparison, constant news updates, inescapable negative news cycles, and I would have to say that in any day, exposure to the best and worst of humanity. They consequently have low boredom tolerance, high capacity for multiple stimuli, and I think we have to think about that in the way that we then design the world around them. Compared to previous generations, they experience a world of increased social and cultural diversity, complex social issues and relationships, where young people draw their identity across culture, ethnicity, race, class, gender and religion. We've got increased number of children living in incredibly complex family dynamics. We've got blended families, intergeneration families, single parents, shared parenting arrangements, and you would know in your own schools that we often have children living in more than one household in any 1 week. This creates a complexity and impacts that I think we are yet to understand. We also know that their trust in institutions and experts has been eroded and not particularly replaced with anything else of substance. In the last decade alone, we have pulled back the curtain on some of our most trusted institutions: churches, banks, politicians, sports codes. Everywhere we've pulled it back, we've seen abuse of power and privilege, and consequently these institutions have been denigrated. But it's not surprising then that children don't trust government and do trust Facebook, and where a person like them is now viewed as twice as credible as anyone in authority. So we have seen a reversal of traditional influence. We also have a situation where we have a lot of what I would call contagious trickle-down stress and anxiety, where we have a world where adults talk about stress constantly. It's contagious, it's impacting on our children and young people, and it's something they talk about frequently in their conversations with me, the impact of anxious parents and stressed out teachers. So we've got it's important when we're designing any responses to school or education that we understand that that's how what the world around children is. But really importantly, and I think something I want to share with you, it's a world where children see adulthood as a negative and stressful experience. I grew up thinking that all I wanted to do was grow up so I would have choice and freedom and independence and I could do whatever I want. Children in the thousands tell me that adults worry that adulthood is negative because adults only worry about paying bills, rent, jobs and food. Adults don't have imagination or fun. Adults don't take kids seriously. Adults don't trust kids and treat them with suspicion. Adults boss kids around, blame them and punish them for reasons they don't understand. And adults don't help. I think that is a generational shift that all of us are responsible for. So we also need to understand that the issues that they've said they are grappling with. Children, to our young ones, are under 12s, talk about being lonely. We know that 10% of children and young people feel they don't have at least one close friend to confide in. They talk about being bullied by adults and children, and you see the WEC data and other things that come out about the 50% of 10 to 16-year-olds who report being bullied on a monthly basis. They talk about being teased, shamed and excluded, and you know that 1 in 4 of the students we're excluding from schools are under 9 years old. They talk about their worries being dismissed, that they don't know what to do and what to say to get help, and they also don't know how to be helpful. I think that's a really important part. They talk about being sick of being compared to other kids by teachers and families, and really importantly, they talk about homework and the pressure to succeed. Our young people are also talking about the cost of things, the cost of school, sport, transport, internet. And we do know that 1 in 6 of our children in South Australia are living in the poorest of households, that 6% of our public school students have no internet at home, and that Australia is in the top 12 most expensive places to live in the world. They talk about discrimination, disrespect from teachers and peers, a lack of inclusion, and they talk about their mental health. 1 in 5 South Australian children and young people are estimated to have an emotional, behavioural or mental health problem. They talk a lot about not feeling prepared for adulthood, and they talk about the influence of gender stereotypes on body image and gender-based bullying. And they talk about still not having a voice, not being valued, and not seeing the purpose of their education. So in order to include children as citizens, we need to understand that context. We also then need to think about, well, if that's their context, how do we fix it? How do we actually engage kids as contributors? So the second part I want to rush to is, how do we engage children as contributors? So when we connect to them and use their experiences and contexts, together we can shape services that impact on them and work better for them. By understanding their lives and how they experience it from their perspective, then we can understand both their expectations of us and what they expect of our values, behaviour, also their expectations of the system, how they want to engage with school and systems, and how they learn. What they have said they need to contribute. They said they need services, systems and people, including schools, that see their potential as co-creators, not passive consumers, and provide opportunities for them to be involved. They want us to let them know that they can contribute and how they can work alongside us. They want us to know how to build relationships and trust and engage them. And they want us particularly to acknowledge their multiple identities. They desperately want us to understand they are not just students and learners, they are teachers, they are siblings, they are coaches, they are employees, they are carers. And they want us to make them feel valued and included. They want us to understand the 21st century life, their challenges and possibilities. They want us to be more receptive to their feedback. They want us to recognise what they're good at, not what they don't know. And they want us to be, I guess, going back to what they think of us as having no imagination and no fun, they want us to be a little bit more playful and perhaps a little bit more youthful in our approach, be open and progressive. So I'm going to run out of time. So I've got a few, I can leave this presentation. So for those of you who are trying to scribble things down, don't get too stressed. Because there's I might just flick to children and young people as consumers. It's quite tricky, I think, for many of us as adults, and particularly school, to recognise that children are education consumers. So as consumers, primary school children say, I'll put this up so you can read this one. They want less homework, less tests. They want reduce the pressure, expectations and competition to be number one. They want more of a stay in classrooms. They want less uniform rules, more focus on creativity and technology, more PE and sport, and they want more inclusion and less punishment. For those of you involved in senior education, I think it's really important to know what your education consumers are coming through the system wanting. I'm not sure they get it when they get to high school, but that's what they want. But in terms of young people, the most common comments in relation to what they want from school are positive relationships where they're heard and respected, caring adults who model respectful behaviours, proactive teachers reaching out, not waiting for kids to ask for help. The common complaint of young people is, why do we have to do all the work? Why do we have to bring the issue to the attention of adults? Surely it's the adults' responsibility to notice and to reach out. Better balance between seeing students as competent but mindful of their developmental levels, more mechanisms to give direct feedback on teaching, and more diversity in the curriculum to understand what's happening, more truth-telling, better civics education, less PowerPoint presentations, more individual assistance, better preparation for life outside school, respectful relationships and sex ed across all year levels, particularly year 11 and 12, more opportunities for privacy and safe spaces to chill out within school environments. And my particular bugbear, which is the one that's come that I didn't know before I started this job, was children don't want to have to ask to go to the toilet. So, if we embrace these child-focused principles and practices in the operation of schools, I think we will get a better result. We'll not only be fulfilling our obligations to children and young people as per the UNCRC, but we as individual adults will be able to be part of a change that starts with us and shows all of our children, not just our own children, that they are valued. What happens in childhood, good or bad, matters for life. What children and young people say they need from us to succeed are welcoming and inclusive environments, opportunities to have a say and be useful, inspiration, aspiration and hope for the future, and healthy relationships with adults and peers based on kindness, fairness, respect and trust. So we know that engaging children and young people is beneficial for many reasons, including making better decisions, improving service delivery and building connections. But I do think, and people always say to me, is this all children? Are we talking? And I say, if we do some of this child-focused rights-based education, then it will have an impact on all children. Because without a doubt, all children want more of a say in how they learn, what they learn, and the environment in which they learn. So for me, this includes children and young people who are thriving and highly engaged, the children that I see who are succeeding and engaged, the kids I see in schools who are surviving but disengaging, and those who are falling off the edge and disengaged. So we know even for our kids who are doing okay, we can see emerging health concerns and the inability to address their own well-being. We still see kids being harassed at schools, and we still see kids questioning their sexuality and gender and the angst and process that involves from their mental health. But we also know that within our disengaging kids, we see a lot of kids with undiagnosed disabilities, chronic illness, kids whose parents have mental illness, kids from refugee and new arrival backgrounds struggling with their settlement, and kids living with disability and children of incarcerated parents. It's all of these kids that want a better deal. So child-focused education acknowledges that what happens within the school gates must include a range of system responses that support children to attend school regularly and participate. So what I'm saying is this isn't the business of schools. This is the business of all of us who actually have an obligation in this state to ensure that children live the best lives that they can. So for me, whole system change is required to enable children to arrive at school in a way that they can have digital access. So we need the whole system or whole community have digital access for low-income families so children and young people can fully engage with their learning. We need affordable, safe public transport to school so kids can get to school with less stress before they even start to sit in the classroom. We do need to address the school affordability issue for low-income families. And I know that people say they struggle to believe it, but there isn't a postcard or a school group or something that doesn't come through for the last 5 years that talks about cost of living. If I had to name one thing on the top of every child's mind, it's a cost of living response. It is, and I people go, really? And I go, absolutely. It is the thing that families are talking about, and it is the thing that's weighing on children's minds. So we do need more support for struggling families. We need financial support to ease the cost of living pressures. We need a whole range of different responses to actually acknowledge that all of our responsibility is to educate our children. These are just something. Obviously, there's a whole heap of stuff. And I would have to say that when we look at what's been playing out in our media over the last 2 weeks and the issues that families in our society and community are facing, then we absolutely need a better early intervention and prevention response to a whole community-led approach to parent support and parent coaching. And really importantly for me, that I think we do need more visibility of children detached or missing from school. This is from the early years, from the number of 4-year-olds who are not engaged in any kind of early education, through to end of school leavers, where we have 1 in 10 still of our kids not in employment, education and training. We need to know who these kids are. We need to know if they're the same kids from 4 to 18, or if they're a different cohort and what's happening. That is not the business of schools, that is the business of community. So there are other things. We need an education system level. I think we need a no exclusion policy. We need things, funding for lunchtime programs, partnerships with NGOs. We need to bring people into the school in a way that doesn't add stress and pressure to your everyday jobs. We need to work out the mechanism that we can allow people to be the support that they want to be in these environments. I'm a great believer, my professional background is a social worker. I think we need a disciplined education-based social workers. I know there's been a big thing around psychology and mental health support in schools. I think that's one part of it. I think there's a whole need for a discipline that engages community, works with groups, does things around actually engaging families. I think we need to have a range of things. There's feedback systems, a whole range of things that are required at a whole education level. I've been advocating for mental health first aid for all senior students. I just think it should be, they would come. If you did it after school, if you did it at lunchtime, they would do it, because trauma dumping, as you know, in schools on each other is a huge issue for our senior students who don't know how to escape from the everyday reality of having all of the pressure of their peers talking to them. And I think we need to set student wellbeing targets. I think beyond literacy and numeracy, then wellbeing targets are something that we could actually look at a whole education level that's actually about including children, educators, SSOs, well-meaning parents, adults, you name it, into the design of what would wellbeing in your school environments look like. And I think at a school level, we also need to think about how do we, for me, it's the National Principles for Child Safe Organisations. Schools are child safe organisations. Not everybody knows what that means. There are 10 principles. It means that we are all required as signatories to the convention to do this. It's about schools really embracing what that means. I think it's about nominating key adults for students who we know are really struggling. There is kids are kind of saying that one adult that checks in does make a difference. That if you always have to be the person who goes and asks for help, then it becomes a really disempowering cycle. So we need to reach out and we need to ensure there's someone watching out for every kid. We need a lot of kids who I've been talking to recently have got chronic illness and find it difficult to attend school. We did hybrid teaching. We want the kind of online, offline resources to be standard so kids can catch up in their own time. And the kids who struggle with attendance for not their own issues, but issues related to their families, can also actually engage with their learning. And we need... and I also say we need our Year 11s and 12s to be receiving sexual health rash education. And we need to be able to get our student feedback in a genuine way. We need all schools to be able to do this, whether it's anonymously in focus groups. We talk a lot about student voice and agency. Some schools are doing brilliantly. Most schools are kind of doing something. And kids are saying, we want more than that. So, I might actually bring it to a conclusion. So we know, you know, everyone knows, schools are places that are far more than academic instructions. Schools foster opportunities, relationships and skills that are critical to children's health, safety, well-being, confidence and aspirations. So at the core of lifting up and learner entitlement, I believe is the need to create a more child-focused, rights-based approach to education that sees children as citizens first, contributors and consumers, and ensures that every school in South Australia is a place where all children and young people experience that they are known, that they are valued, that they have a voice, and that they can see value in what they're learning. Thank you.